History Holes.
Welcome back to History Holes. In our last episode, we witnessed the turbulent end of French colonial rule and the dawn of a new, uncertain era. We saw how nationalist movements, decades in the making, seized the opportunity presented by a world at war, culminating in the Viet Minh's dramatic seizure of power during the August Revolution of 1945. But independence, declared in a moment of revolutionary fervor, was far from secure. The old colonial masters were returning, and a new global conflict, the Cold War, was beginning to cast its long shadow over Southeast Asia. Today we begin the story of a brutal 8-year struggle for freedom, the First Indochina War. Part 1. The fragile peace shatters, 1945 to 1946. The autumn of 1945 was a time of immense hope and profound anxiety in Hanoi. Ho Chi Minh's new government, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, was attempting to consolidate its authority, but it was a government in name only, with little control outside the major cities. The situation was incredibly tense. Under the terms of the Potsdam Conference, Allied forces were arriving to disarm the surrendered Japanese. In the north, this meant the arrival of nearly 200,000 Chinese nationalist troops, who brought with them a collection of anti-communist Vietnamese exiles, all vying for power. In the south, British forces under General Douglas Gracey landed in Saigon, with a mandate to maintain order, but a clear preference for restoring the old colonial regime. The French did not wait long. Facilitated by the British, French troops, many of them recently released from Japanese prison camps, rearmed and quickly moved to reclaim Saigon in late September 1945. The city erupted in violence as French soldiers clashed with Việt Minh forces, beginning a bloody guerrilla war that would engulf Cochinchina. In the north, Ho Chi Minh played a masterful diplomatic game. He negotiated with the Chinese occupiers, even dissolving the Indochinese Communist Party in November to appease them and forming a broader coalition government to project an image of national unity. His primary goal was to get the Chinese out, and to do that he made a painful choice. He began negotiating with the French representative, Jean Saint-Denis. On March 6, 1946, they signed a preliminary agreement. France would recognize Vietnam as a free state within a new French Union, and in return, 15,000 French troops would be allowed back into the north to replace the Chinese. For Ho, it was a tactical compromise to oust the Chinese. For the French, it was their ticket back into Hanoi. The March 6th agreement was doomed from the start. Both sides were buying time. The subsequent negotiations, held at the Fontainebleau Conference in France, quickly broke down. The French had no intention of granting Vietnam true independence or unity. This was made brutally clear by the actions of their High Commissioner in Saigon, Admiral d'Argenlieu, a hardline colonialist who, while the talks were ongoing, unilaterally declared a separate Republic of Cochinchina, effectively severing the South from the rest of the country. For the Viet Minh, this was the ultimate betrayal. The fragile peace shattered in the port city of Haiphong in late November 1946. A dispute over customs duties escalated into a violent confrontation. The French, determined to assert their authority, issued an ultimatum and then subjected the Vietnamese quarter of the city to a merciless naval and aerial bombardment that killed thousands of civilians. This was the point of no return. In Hanoi, Viet Minh forces prepared for the inevitable. On the evening of December 19, 1946, after sabotaging the city's power plant, Viet Minh soldiers launched a coordinated assault on French positions throughout the capital. The First Indochina War had begun. Part 2, a war of attrition, 1947 to 1950. With the cities lost, the Viet Minh executed a strategic retreat into the rugged, mountainous region of Viet Buc in northern Tonkin. This was not a defeat, but a calculated pivot to a new phase of the war. Under the command of General Vong Nguyen Giap, they adopted a classic Maoist three-stage strategy for a people's war. The first stage was survival and defense, preserving their forces while building a powerful political base among the rural population. They established a shadow government, collecting taxes, administering justice, and spreading their revolutionary ideology. Their military actions were focused on small-scale guerrilla attacks, ambushes on French convoys, sabotage of infrastructure, and nighttime raids on isolated outposts. The goal was simple and brutal: to wear down the French, bleed them of resources and morale, and transform the countryside into a hostile sea in which the colonial army would slowly drown. The French, for their part, believed they could win a political war as well as a military one. They understood that the Viet Minh's greatest strength was its nationalist appeal. To counter this, they devised what came to be known as the Bao Dai Solution. In 1949, they coaxed the last emperor of the Nguyen dynasty, Bao Dai, out of his comfortable exile to head a new, nominally independent state of Vietnam. The plan was to create a legitimate, non-communist nationalist alternative that could win the loyalty of the Vietnamese people and drain support from Ho Chi Minh. From the outset, however, the project was fatally flawed. The French were unwilling to grant Bao Dai any real power, and his government, propped up by French bayonets and staffed by wealthy Francophile elites, was widely seen by the populace as a puppet regime. It was a government that lacked the one thing it needed most: genuine nationalist credibility. Militarily, the war settled into a bloody and exhausting stalemate, especially in the crucial Red River Delta. The French commander, General de Tassigny, constructed a formidable network of hundreds of concrete forts, watchtowers, and interlocking artillery positions known as the De Latre Line. This defensive belt was designed to pacify the delta, protecting its rich rice harvests and dense population from Viet Minh infiltration. During the day, the French controlled the roads in the cities, their armored columns and air power giving them a clear advantage. But at night, the countryside belonged to the Viet Minh. Giap's forces moved like ghosts, emerging from the villages and swamps to ambush patrols, assassinate officials, and sabotage French installations before melting back into the landscape. It was a relentless, grinding war of attrition with no end in sight, a struggle that exhausted French resources and tested the patience of a public half a world away. Part 3, The Tide Turns, 1950 to 1953. For 3 years, the war had been a grinding, bloody stalemate. The French controlled the cities, but the Viet Minh owned the night and the countryside. It was a war of attrition that neither side could decisively win. Then, in 1949, an event thousands of kilometers away changed everything. In China, Mao Zedong's communist forces won their civil war, establishing the People's Republic of China. Suddenly, the Viet Minh were no longer an isolated guerrilla army fighting alone. They now had a powerful ally right on their northern border. This new alliance utterly transformed the conflict. The border, once a barrier patrolled by the French, now became a vital artery for the revolution. A flood of modern weapons, mortars, artillery, machine guns poured into the Viet Buc. But the aid was more than just material. The Chinese provided a secure rear base where Viet Minh troops could be trained and equipped as a modern, conventional army. A Chinese military advisory group, CMAC, was formed in April 1950 to help plan and execute large-scale operations. Ho Chi Minh himself traveled to Beijing and Moscow, securing diplomatic recognition from both the Soviet Union and China. The war was no longer just a colonial struggle. It was becoming a front in the global Cold War. With this newfound strength, General Vuong Nguyen Giap was ready to shift his strategy from guerrilla harassment to decisive, conventional attacks. In the autumn of 1950, he launched a series of brilliant campaigns along the Sino-Vietnamese border. In a stunning offensive, Viet Minh regulars, now well-armed and well-trained, systematically overran and destroyed the chain of French forts that had guarded the frontier for years. The French were routed, suffering thousands of casualties and abandoning huge stockpiles of weapons. It was a catastrophic defeat for France, a strategic masterstroke by Giap that cleared the border entirely and opened a direct, unstoppable supply route from China. The French disaster on the border sent shockwaves across the Western world. In Washington, the fall of China to communism had already created a climate of fear. The outbreak of the Korean War in June 1950 seemed to confirm their worst nightmare, a monolithic communist bloc intent on global domination. The struggle in Indochina was no longer seen as a dirty colonial war, but as a crucial battleground in the fight against communism. Fearing the domino effect, the United States made a momentous decision. It would bankroll the French war effort. American military aid began to pour into Indochina, eventually paying for up to 80% of the war's cost. A military assistance advisory group, MA, was established in Saigon to oversee the flow of supplies. The First Indochina War had become an international conflict, with American money and weapons backing the French against a Việt Minh army supplied and advised by Communist China. The stage was set for a climactic showdown. Part 4, the showdown at Điện Biên Phủ 1954. By late 1953, the war had become an agonizing drain on France. With American funding came immense pressure to show results, to find a way to break the stalemate. The French commander, General Henri Navarre, devised a bold and incredibly risky plan. He decided to create a trap. He would build a massive, heavily fortified airland base deep in enemy territory, in the remote mountain valley of Điện Biên Phủ, near the Laotian border. He believed this unbeatable fortress would act as a strategic anchor, blocking Việt Minh access to Laos and luring General Giap into a conventional set-piece battle. There, in the open valley, Navarre was confident that superior French firepower, artillery, and air support could annihilate the Việt Minh army once and for all. What the French saw as a brilliant trap, Vong Nguyen Giap saw as the ultimate opportunity. He accepted the challenge. What followed was one of the most incredible logistical feats in modern military history. While French planes airlifted tons of equipment into the valley, the Việt Minh began to move an entire army through hundreds of kilometers of dense, roadless jungle. Tens of thousands of civilian porters, pushing bicycles laden with supplies or carrying heavy loads on their backs, created a human supply chain. Most astonishingly, they disassembled massive artillery pieces, hauled them by hand up the steep, jungle-covered mountains surrounding the French garrison, and reassembled them in concealed, heavily fortified bunkers, completely invisible from the air. The French command, blinded by arrogance, had no idea they were being encircled by heavy guns. On March 13, 1954, the siege began. Giap's hidden artillery unleashed a devastating barrage on the French positions, shocking the garrison and, most critically, destroying the airfield. The fortress was cut off, its only lifeline severed. For the next 57 days, the world watched as the Việt Minh relentlessly tightened their grip. They dug a vast network of trenches, slowly strangling the French strongpoints. The fighting was brutal, fought hand-to-hand in a nightmarish landscape of mud and craters as the monsoon rains turned the valley floor into a quagmire. The French fought with courage, but they were doomed. On May 7, 1954, the Việt Minh launched their climactic assault. The white flag was raised over the French command bunker. The victory at Điện Biên Phủ was a thunderclap that echoed across the globe. A small, technologically outmatched Asian army had decisively defeated a major European colonial power. The battle broke the will of the French government to continue the war. The very next day, the great powers convened at the Geneva Conference to settle the fate of Indochina. For the Việt Minh, it was a moment of bitter irony. They had won on the battlefield, but they lost at the negotiating table. The new Cold War realities meant that neither the United States nor the Soviet Union and China wanted to see a unified, communist Vietnam emerge just yet. Under intense pressure from their allies, the Việt Minh were forced to accept a compromise. The Geneva Accords called for a French withdrawal, but they also decreed a temporary partition of the country at the 17th parallel. The North would be governed by Ho Chi Minh's Democratic Republic of Vietnam, while the South would remain under the state of Vietnam. National elections were promised within 2 years to reunify the country. It was a promise that would never be kept. Instead of bringing peace, the division of Vietnam set the stage for an even larger, more devastating conflict, one that would pit Vietnamese against Vietnamese and draw the United States into its longest war. I thank you very much for joining us on this journey. Please leave a like and subscribe if you want more. If you feel like it, tell us what else you'd like to hear. See you on the next episode.